Governor John Carlin, Democrat from the state of Kansas. What is the significance of the education report being released by the governors this weekend?
Its significance will depend on what happens. No report's of much value unless there's follow-through. I think it's an excellent report. There's no question about that. But it's what happens this year, next year, and the following years on education that counts. The best recommendation in the world, but if you don't implement it, it doesn't make much difference.
Will a report on education from 50 governors make a difference? Is that the thing that's been needed the catalyst needed to push some reforms along in education?
I don't think there's any one thing that'll suddenly push us forward and make us competitive, but certainly when you consider that most of the education responsibility is at the state and local level, not in Washington, certainly it's of more value for 50 governors to submit a report and commit itself to an agenda than for it to come from Washington, where there can be a lot of rhetoric, but quite frankly, they do very little with education. It's in the state and local arena that it happens.
Good morning. We're live from the Hyatt Regency Hotel on the island of Hilton Head. Hilton Head is in the southeasternmost corner of the state of South Carolina, about a 30-minute drive to Savannah, right across the border of Georgia. And we are here this weekend because the nation's governors are gathering for their annual meeting, the 78th annual meeting, I believe, the summer meeting, to release a report on education. And this morning you'll be seeing several sessions chaired by Governor Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, where the governors will be gathering together to talk about the report they issued yesterday and how they can implement that report and to hammer out some of the specific details involved. Phone lines are open. We'd like to involve you in our conversation with the governors on education. If you live in the Eastern and Central time zones, there's a number for you. And if you live in the Pacific and Mountain time zones, special number just for you. Our guest, Governor John Carlin, Democrat of Kansas, first elected in 1978, re-elected in 1982, and he is a former chairman of the National Governors Association. Is there one special concern that you bring with you to this governors conference, something that you especially want to discuss with your fellow governors?
I am designated today and still the lead governor on the budget. And as I look at the educational issue, as I look at all the other things that need to be done, if we don't address the budget crisis that still exists in Washington, the deficit issue, if we don't develop a trade policy and start to implement it, all the talk about what we want to do in the environmental area and the educational area will be a little more than talk, because unless we get the economy straightened out and deal with these major structural problems we have, I don't have much confidence that we're going to be able to implement all the other things we'd like to do.
Now, Congress has passed the Graham-Rudman-Hollings proposal to reduce the deficit to zero in about 5 years. Hasn't that solved our budget crisis?
No, it hasn't, because we've got the huge deficit that we're paying interest on. We've got a situation now where, yes, this year they're going to be able probably to finesse it with some kind of at least paper shuffling cut that'll allow them to technically qualify. But most of the people on the inside recognize that they face a much greater challenge next year, a much more difficult one. They'll be right back in the soup. Again, they postpone, put off, and really haven't dealt with the issue. And they won't until we get an executive working with a Congress willing to admit that the problem is big enough they've got to put all the cards on the table. They eliminate revenue and a major part of the budget in their discussion, and so they'll never deal with it until they
Does that mean it has to be a Democratic executive?
No, it means we have to have an executive willing to address the issue. Certainly I would hope it would be a Democrat that would have the courage to step up and say, this is what needs to be done. We talk about in the educational discussion we're having here, a very valuable one, about being competitive. How can we be competitive if we don't have an economy that produces the resources to invest in education and research to allow us to catch up in some cases and move forward and be competitive?
Phone lines are open for viewers in all areas of the country. If you have a question or a comment, we'd like to hear from you. Governor Carlin of Kansas is our guest this half hour. First call is from Indianapolis, Indiana. Good morning, Indianapolis. Go ahead, please.
Morning. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate forum to call in on. However, my question arises around media attention on such subjects as AIDS, drunk driving, drug abuse, what have you, versus a seemingly almost media wearing a blindfold on the subject of paranoid schizophrenia. In last month's issue of Reader's Digest, the numbers used were 25% of all hospital beds nationwide are occupied by paranoid schizophrenics.
Hold it one second, caller. I think you're absolutely right. This is probably the wrong forum. We're going to be discussing the governor's work here and education, and we will have other shows on other topics, but I'm going to ask you to confine it specifically to the budget deficit, education, or some of that. Is there a specific question on that you'd like to ask?
Well, the governor's conference is on education. I have a 13-year-old son in school right now. Again, according to this article I read, he is in the most in the danger age group for paranoid schizophrenia. I have two friends who have sons that are diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which is now incurable. Their sons are
Indianapolis?
Stuck for life.
Thank you very much for the call. We appreciate it. And if you'd call in on another program, we'll try to discuss that issue. The governors, how do they feel about the way Congress has gone about tackling the budget deficit and the budget problems? Has Congress done a good job?
Not really, quite frankly. I think most of us are quite frustrated. You know, the governors have been very active in the budget arena. We've adopted resolutions, not just calling on Congress to deal with the deficit, but we've outlined specifically from our perspective how it should be done. Not just from a parochial interest, not just saying you should deal with it and make sure you protect these particular programs for the state. But we've been willing to take on the tough issues, like Social Security, like the revenue issue, like the across-the-board approach that will allow us to get something done, trying to be realistic about it, acknowledging that we're going to have to be a part of the solution, meaning fewer dollars from Washington for programs that are important to the state. But despite 3 strong years of effort working towards that goal and that objective, we have not made that much progress despite Graham Rudman. We have a Congress that, with the exception of a few leaders, unwilling to really face up to the challenge, and we have a president who doesn't even acknowledge the deficit is really a problem. Some lip service, but really no commitment. You don't see the president taking on the deficit like he gets involved with the tax reform and contra aid and so forth. The deficit is something that's off to the side. It's not a priority. Yet when you represent a state like I do, where we've already closed 11 banks this year, where we have farmers leaving the land every day, bankrupt, businesses going out, manufacturing not able to compete, and yet we merrily go along ignoring all of this. It's a tragic situation as far as I'm concerned.
Union, South Carolina, you're on the air with Governor Carlin of Kansas. Go ahead, please.
Oh, yes, I'd like to ask the governor if he does like they do in South Carolina. You can move across the state, or you can even be in the same schoolhouse. And on the same grade and same subject can be taught out of a different book. Why does not the educators decide that all children across the United States at a particular level in a particular grade be taught out of a particular book? Is it because the monies are in there? Or, I mean, they talk about teachers' freedom of expression. I think schools should be taught, like, be sure they can read, write, and arithmetic. And if you had take a child from South Carolina to Kansas, they should be able to pick up at the same level the next day.
Okay.
That's the reason we have such poor education. And I would like to make a comment. I was listening to C-SPAN earlier when someone was talking, and there was an editor on news, man from Charleston, South Carolina, and the lady was talking about the people in South Carolina was against tax being raised simply because we were not getting quality education. First get quality education and then raise taxes, or bring new teachers in that are qualified and give them that. And he said it was voted on. It was only voted on by a Democratic Congress. I mean, a Democratic House of Representatives and the Senate that is majority Democrat. The people of South Carolina were against it. They fought it for months. Thank you.
So you were against that. The caller is gone, unfortunately, but there was a 1-cent tax increase in the sales tax here in South Carolina, and that money went into improving education, which is what she was referring to. What about uniformity as far as books across the country? Should all states be using the same books to teach kids?
No, I understand what the caller is saying, because quite frankly, and we, families do move, kids do find themselves in new school districts, but when the state and local governments put up the bulk of the money, and we pretty well made the decision and we're heading stronger in that direction, it's It's going to be very difficult to come up with a textbook that 50 states are going to accept. I think the better alternative is through the pressure of competition and the efforts that are being made by governors and teachers and a lot of people to raise the quality of education, that we just improve education. And of course, textbooks are a key element, and there need to be standards and guidelines, but they should come at I believe, at the state level. I think from a practical and political point of view, you're not going to find textbook approval coming out of Washington. That is one arena where I think it can be done at the state and local level. But certainly, the problem is there. But I think it comes, quite frankly, through better classroom teaching, more support for that classroom teacher, better education, quality education, and yes, using appropriate textbooks. But I think the student can go from South Carolina to Kansas if they've been in a good educational setting. If the textbook changes, I don't think that will be that much of a problem.
Out to southern Arizona. Tucson, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just wanted to say just about what the governor got through saying, that it really comes down to the classroom and the teacher in the classroom. If they love children, they make a much better teacher. And I think a lot of our problems today with drugs in the classroom are kids who are not wanted. They're not really able to like themselves, and I think that they need to be successful. If kids in the classroom can be successful, then they're not likely to be on drugs or alcohol.
Okay, Tucson, Arizona, thanks for the call, Governor Carlin.
No question, our caller is correct. There's a lot of connection. Let's go where you really basically started, and that is the classroom teacher. I think that is, and if you're going to set a priority, if you're going to line up and say what's the most important, buildings, administration, whatever, it's the classroom teacher that in the end is going to make the difference. And all the other parts come into play to assist that classroom teacher, whether it's the schools of education that train teachers for tomorrow, or whether it's the in-service training that's being provided to keep that classroom teacher current and on top of what needs to be done. Any way you look at it, it comes back to the classroom teacher. It also comes back, quite frankly, to what we're paying that classroom teacher. We can't expect what we have today in quality to stay, or for us to attract quality, unless we're willing to pay a higher salary, generally speaking, across this country. Our young people going into the university college level today have many choices, and in many cases a lot better choices, particularly from a financial perspective. Can't ignore that salary issue for teachers.
Has there been a change of heart across the country in that taxpayers are willing to put out a little more to pay our teachers a little better so we have better teachers?
Generally, yes. I think any time, whether at the state or local level, you're selling a levy or a tax increase or an additional appropriation, I think if you can show the need, you can get basically public support for that effort. But they don't want necessarily just more put into the same system. One of the things we've tried to do in Kansas, as we've made some progress raising teacher salaries, we've taken our Kansas ranking in terms of the states from 36th in the country now to 28th or 29th in terms of average teacher salary. But at the same time, we've improved our schools of education. We've increased the standards for certification. We now test teachers going into the field. We're developing an internship program for that first year so we can work with that beginning teacher to help that teacher be an even better person in the classroom.
Coming up in about 13 minutes, Governor Lamar Alexander, Republican of Tennessee and chairman of the Governors Association, this year will be our guest for a 30-minute call-in program. Right now, Governor Carlin of Kansas is with us. Phone lines are open if you have a question or a comment. Next call is from St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Governor Carlin if he doesn't believe that since children spend a lot of their first semester each year in brushing up on last year's courses, it wouldn't be better for education if we had year-long school terms, and that if he doesn't believe that that teachers, in order to further their education, should be allowed time to go to college on the taxpayer as part of their tenure. And the second part is, shouldn't education have a system kind of like the post office, a czar, so they could take it out of politics? I think politics is the worst thing that's happened to our education over the last 40 years.
All right, thanks for the call.
I don't know what our caller means by taking it out of politics. We elect school board members, but in most states I think those elections are non-partisan. But politics is part of life, and if you're talking about the politics within the school system, the politics between administrators and teachers, I think that is a little beyond the immediate wave of the magic wand as far as governors are concerned. But you talk about classroom teacher, and you talk about what we can do with that classroom teacher. There's no question, but that's where it's got to happen. That's where we got to get back to. That's where the improvement is going to be. As far as year-around, I think most teachers would agree. One, they need a break. Two, I think in terms of students, yes, we need to use more of a year-around approach. Not maybe a 12-month school year, but expand our use of a summer program to assist students who need help, so that those who are maybe trailing at the end of a school year before the fall starts, they are ready to go, take care of special problems, make 12-month use of our school facilities in a more practical way, but at the same time recognize that classroom teacher, one, needs a break from the classroom, and two, probably needs, as you've indicated also, the need to go back to school and be updated. And yes, they should be supported in that effort, because ongoing, continuing education, in-service training, those are things that are going to have to be an absolute critical part of the program and in place and operational every year if we're going to stay competitive and do what needs to be done, which we really don't have a choice. Education must deliver if we're going to be competitive for jobs in the future.
I think it was Governor Kane of New Jersey who in yesterday's opening news conference, said that education is now good politics. With the governors making this report and taking a stand, are they bringing more politics into education?
I would say yes, but from a healthy point of view. How are you going to get additional appropriations, more tax dollars invested in education if you don't involve politics? Quite frankly, you're going to have to bring in the governor and the legislators, local school officials to get the job done. And so it's healthy that now education is a strong political issue. Now, the vulnerability or the risk here, quite frankly, is if it's no more than a political issue, if it's no more than rhetoric. I mean, we don't improve education with a good bumper sticker. What we got to have is a better program, better teacher salaries, a machine that works. But politics can get us to that end if we don't just talk about what needs to be done, but actually implement a good program.
Back to the phones. Belle Vernon, Pennsylvania. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Since our schools are definitely graduating students who are not possessing the necessary skills of reading and spelling, etc., and by reports, Japan has a higher quality of education. What would be the feasibility of sending top educators to Japan to learn their methods and perhaps review these methods we are presently using and incorporate some of Japan's methods into our present school systems?
Okay. Pennsylvania, thanks for the call.
Well, there is a strong feeling, and there are test scores to show, quite frankly, that you can not only look to Japan, but Europe and many parts of the world and find a better product coming out of the classroom. And there are those. I mean, it's not unique. We have looked, and there are studies that have been completed in terms of what they're doing and we're not. They have a longer class day. They have a longer class year. They're more regimented. It's more almost militaristic in some countries in terms of education. They have it's a different culture in many ways in their approach. Now, what we need to find, quite frankly, in my judgment, because it comes back, you got to have a practical approach. We're not going to just copy somebody else's system, but we've got to find the unique American way to compete. I think we can learn from other countries, but we've got to find our way, one that we'll accept, one that we'll implement, and consequently improve our educational system and allow us to compete. But recognizing that the competition out there has in many ways passed us by is an important first step. And then finding what needs to be done. And I think the report that is coming out at this conference is a part of what that game plan should be, at least looking at some of the specific areas where we need to make progress and begin to move forward. But we're going to have to develop our plan, one that we like, that makes sense for us, and then, most importantly, implement it.
Eskridge, Kansas, you're on with your governor. Go ahead, please. Turn your TV set down all the way and you'll get rid of that echo.
Good evening, Governor.
Hi.
Caller, turn your TV set down and you'll get rid of that echo.
Okay, how's this?
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Governor, my name's Sam Bridgman, and I live in Eskridge, Kansas, and I have several comments to make on education in Kansas. On the whole, I think that the people in my school district try to do a good job, but I feel that there's too many activities and not enough stress on education, and I don't think that they try to stress that students be responsible in high school. I have children in grade school, middle school, and high school, and on the whole, I have no problem with grade school and some of middle school, but high school, I think that if anything, they might need to extend high school maybe 1 year, and since a lot of kids are in a position and not being able to go to college, maybe they could give them some further training in basic how to get along and how to do business and basic rights and things like that. And I think another problem is that we don't spend enough money on good teachers. I think that instead of being somewhere down the list and spending money on teachers, I think we ought to be leading the nation, because in my feeling, you get what you pay for.
Okay, Kansas, thanks for the call.
I know there are a lot of teachers out there who will agree with the gentleman this morning from Eskridge. There's no doubt we've got to do better, as I've indicated a couple times already on this program, in terms of paying teachers. You make a specific, though, comment on an area we haven't mentioned this morning, that being extracurricular versus the classroom. There's a place for extracurricular. I think most people in education would agree with that, but most of us, not unique to Kansas, but around the country, have been trying to face the challenge of a better balance, putting the extracurricular program in its proper place to serve its proper purpose, to get the job done where it complements the educational classroom setting rather than competes to the point where it's a deterrent to the progress of the child in the classroom. And certainly, and I think it's not unique in your specific district, but other districts throughout the state, throughout the country, where we've got situations where, and particularly in high school, when you get in the athletic competition and the traveling and leagues with fewer schools and so forth, now, and very appropriately, we have women and men competing, increases the possibility of an inefficient operation that simply takes too much away from the classroom. We've got to find, and I think there are better ways to do it, to make better use of, some have suggested make better use of our summers. I don't know whether that's the solution, but we need to, not just in Eskridge, but throughout the country, find a better way to achieve a more appropriate balance between extracurricular activity in the classroom.
Concord, North Carolina, you're our next caller. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
First, a very telling thing I think we should look at is when we tune into C-SPAN, we don't see cheerleaders. This is one of the things that's badly wrong with our educational system is our institutions are being used to raise up sports personalities later on, far up in college. We're using them for minor leagues for sports. Now, what we need to do, in my opinion, and I'll ask a question later on about it, is I'd say harden up our curricula. We cannot keep these fluff courses in education wasting all kind of money, taxpayers' money being used to educate people, for example, to play golf in take Ohio State University, and it's taxpayers' money, and it's not being used for educational purposes. But basically speaking, starting in the lower grades, we've got to harden our curricula. We must not educate our children to be well-adjusted little morons when they come out who can't read. I, myself, the year before last in Tennessee, I was doing a construction job, and I had a man came to me looking for a $5 an hour labor job. The man couldn't fill out an application, and he had attended Tennessee State University for 2 years, and I found out he was on a football scholarship until he flunked out the team, not his course, which he obviously flunked.
Caller, I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to hold you right there. Any comment, Governor Carlin?
Well, I think the caller has a point that, excuse me, would be shared by many of our listeners, many citizens across this country, and it ties in really with the previous question, and I just simply say this. I think we're making some progress. More and more you find Texas as an example where they implemented the no pass, no play rule, and probably, I think, in fairness to many other states, they probably had further distance to come. They've had a great athletic program, emphasized it considerably. We're moving in the direction of more balance, but we have a long ways to go. But you're starting to read about coaches now. We're talking about the university level in this particular area, where they're going to start emphasizing, I think, the academic side. I think the universities are going to put more and more pressure on their coaches to say, look, we want to win, but we also want to be able to show that our athletes are graduating, and not just graduating in a technical way. They have competed and done well in the classroom as well.
Very quickly, do you support a no pass, no play type of a law?
It's almost impossible to answer that because every state's got their rules different. What I support is a stronger emphasis on the classroom, and yes, making sure that the athletic competition doesn't get in the way. A student shouldn't participate on the athletic field if they're not doing well in the classroom. If they need additional time in the classroom, then it has to come from their athletic time.
Governor John Carlin, Democrat of Kansas, completing his second term as governor. Thank you very much for joining us.